I'm Kathy Howell, and I wrote with Hearts of Honor, a family story of World War II. And so why did I choose this subject to write about? First, I was always fascinated by World War II, which I'm hoping you guys will be too. The drama, the adventure, and oh yes, the romance. Not to mention saving the world from unspeakable villains, something we still seem to have in common these days, I guess. Second, I had always heard that my husband's uncle and my cousin's uncle sitting here, they had an uncle who was killed in World War II at the tender age of 21. I did not know the details of his story, so I decided to dig deeper. During research, I was surprised at what I learned, and the words began to flow from there. As the facts were revealed, the story began to write itself. It was such a compelling story, it wasn't hard to write at all. It was just begging to be told. What if I could shape the plot around my husband and my cousin's family as a centerpiece? So I used historical fiction to reimagine their true story. What if there was the Summers family, based on the Sprunk family, living in a small town called Mountain View, not unlike Silver City, New Mexico? What if this family ended up giving several of their children to serve in World War II? I long to capture the early 1940s, what it looked like, what it sounded like, and what it felt like to be a part of the greatest generation. How does the journey start and how does it end? It started with a 16-year-old boy. In the story, the character's name was JD, who wants to ditch his hometown to see the world, or at least El Paso, Texas. And it ends up as JD finds himself a prisoner of the Bataan Death March. How could this happen, you might ask? Like, how could that happen? That it's an easier and quicker lead than you might think. It was quick. So let's quickly review the main characters. There's Jess and Lainey Summers, who are based on John and Melinda Sprunk. Elise and Margot Summers, based on the sisters of Elsie Sprunk Howell, who's his mom, and Margaret Sprunk Lockwood, who is Linda Lockwood's mom. And finally, the character, the younger brother, who became a POW. In the book, it's J.D. Summers, and he's based on the character of, the actual person, of Sergeant Jack Daniel Sprunk. I'd like to share some key scenes from the book. So I was just going to read from the movie. It's 1941, and the Summers are concerned about their younger son, who is presently in the crosshairs of the enemy. Is it okay if I sit down?
Yeah.
Fragrant boughs of holly lined the tabletops. Fresh mistletoe hung over the doorway, and the crooked little juniper tree was strung with popcorn, cranberries, and Lainey's hope. It was a little early for Christmas to adorn the Summers household, but no one seemed to notice on this day. No one noticed the decorations at all. Their expressions grim, Jess, Lainey, and Elise huddled around the old Philco radio. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, boomed FDR. The United States of America was suddenly, deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No one spoke or even batted an eye. Lainey's mouth tightened in a line so small it could barely be seen. Jess repeatedly clenched his jaw, and Elise realized she had never seen her parents look so unhappy. I regret to tell you that over 3,000 American lives have been lost, the president's baritone continued, because of this unprovoked, dastardly attack by Japan. I ask that the Congress declare a state of war. Lainey's hands flew to cover her mouth, and all the blood drained from her face. I knew something like this would happen sooner or later, she whispered. Our country's at war today, and so are my children, she thought. And JD is right smack in the middle of it. He didn't have to be. It's my fault for signing those enlistment papers. We should have stood up to him and told him no. What kind of parents are we? Jess tenderly brushed a lock of hair sprinkled with some gray he'd never seen before out of his wife's face. Like it or not, Laney, JD is a young man now. Let's all take a deep breath and calm down. Jess poured a glass of whiskey and lit his pipe. Elise had never seen him do that midday. Ignoring her husband, Laney got up and went outside in the cold. Elise started to get up, but Jess put up his round, calloused hand. Best not to follow her, sis. She needs to be alone. The father and daughter heard Laney whistle and call for Star until JD's filly nickered in response. For what seemed like forever, Elise leaned on the south window, watching her mother stroke Star's mane. The older woman spoke to the horse as if it were human. When the daughter could watch no more, she turned around in time to see her father take one last swig of whiskey before leaving the room. During my writing, I discovered all these discoveries came to fruition, during this writing. We found a lot of things. We found an authentic poem written 80 years ago by my husband's mother when she was a young woman. Unbeknownst to her when she wrote it, it would only be 1 month before her little brother was held captive. And this isn't my writing, but I just had to include this. Our brother. Poems are written by the wives whose husbands are serving Uncle Sam. Songs are sung about the ladies whose sweetheart is an army man. Praises are paid to the mothers whose son has joined the colors his country to defend, but nothing is said about the sisters whose baby brother is with MacArthur's men. Do we worry and do we miss you? The answer is plain as day. We pray for you every moment as you fight for the USA. Are we proud of you, dear brother, for doing your best for Uncle Sam? Our hearts swell with pride as we say, our brother is a MacArthur's man. So we'll pray for God to protect you and to watch over you along your way and to keep our country safe and free for you to come home to someday. This is written by Elsie Sprunk, March 1942. All right, so then this is my son Jared here. He's the grandnephew of Sergeant Jack Sprunk, and he will now read, and I'll tell the setting. It is July 1942. Can everybody still hear me pretty good? 42, inside Camp O'Donnell in the Philippines. JD has been held captive there since the Bataan Death March. He attempts to escape.
At long last, they tied him to the chair, trussed his feet, and gagged his mouth. Only when he couldn't move did they untie his hands. Keep your hands still or I'll cut them off, warned a guard called Komatsu. He showed JD an axe. The others laughed. JD steadied his hands on the table. They were no longer trembling. Holes from the barbed wire were hidden because his palms faced downwards. The guards examined his ragged, dirty fingernails while exchanging terse words in Japanese. The young prisoner wondered why they were doing this. He soon got his answer. Komatsu soon produced some bamboo shoots. One more time, who helped you escape? JD bit his lip, refusing to respond. Never give the enemy information and never give up a friend. It was the code. Besides, if he did talk, they'd probably torture him anyway for the hell of it. Just please, God, give me the courage to endure this. JD forgot the bullet wound in his shoulder. He forgot everything. White-hot pain filled his being when the bamboo was brutally shoved under his nails. He never knew anything could hurt this bad. Rational thoughts left his brain. His mind literally left him. Komatsu removed his gag. JD could hear primordial screams filling the room, not realizing they were his own. It took way too long for the blessing of unconsciousness to totally envelop him. On that hot day in July, the other prisoners were not assigned to their usual labor. Instead, everyone was kept within earshot of JD's torture. Many of the men frantically covered their ears. Others cried like babies. JD's own unit was especially sickened by the screams. I told him not to go, Jimmy uttered miserably. I wish I had a tenth of his courage, said Sarge.
So, okay, now we're pressing forward. Years in prison have passed for JD. He was sitting down at an old oak table in a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of Mountain View. Go on and start, JD. I made all your favorites, said his smiling mother. Mouth-watering fried chicken, steaming mashed potatoes and gravy, homemade biscuits oozing with freshly churned butter, and hot, crunchy ears of corn were piled high in front of him. Mother straightened her apron and pulled an apple pie from the oven for dessert. JD took the first forkful of succulent food, careful not to drop a morsel as it headed for his lips. Pow! A sharp noise woke JD from his sleep. Someone nearby whimpered and begged for mercy. JD rolled into a ball and covered his ears, trying to escape the sound of cruelty that was never far away. He always wondered if he was next. When the shout in Japanese, followed by more crying and pleading, finally stopped, JD uncovered his ears and tried to find respite in sleep. He could feel the lice traversing up and down his body, making him want to crawl out of his skin. His stomach rumbled loudly, begging for calories. His ribs and pelvic bones, elbows and knees all protruded from a wasted body, a body covered in old and new bruises and dirty open wounds. He remembered the time so long ago when he had tried to escape at Camp O'Donnell. Since he'd been transferred to Cabanchuan, they watched him like a hawk, and he had no physical or mental energy to try it again. Besides, the hellacious punishment wasn't worth the effort. As was his custom, he tried to find some flesh to measure, but on this night he couldn't pinch even a tenth of an inch. His tattered army fatigues hung on him like a scarecrow. The young man from New Mexico rolled over and tried not to think about how hard the cold ground was. His cot had long since deteriorated. He double-checked under a hidden stone to make sure his spoon was still there. Thank God no one had taken it. He caressed it obsessively, wanting to be ready in 7 more hours when the Japanese would fill it 2 times with watery rice. JD shut his eyes, but sleep would not come. What was he doing in this nightmare anyway? He had lost track of time, but he figured he was nearing 19 by now. 19. He should have stayed in Mountain View to help Daddy with the dairy and the prospecting he always loved. He could just see him now, Daddy with the somber brown eyes, quietly soothing the cows as he milked them, Daddy mining for gold and silver in the hill beyond their home. JD rolled over once more. He closed his eyes and saw his rodeo horse Star, flip-flopping across the brush and cactus. Who was taking care of her while he'd been away? His mind drifted. Maybe he'd better feed and water her himself. He knew where that special stash of grain was. Come on, Star. He whistled and clapped. But this time she did not even bother to turn around. He realized she'd probably forgotten him long ago. I got one more. At the end of the war, it's the fall of 1945. Lainey is downtown. Lainey the mom. She still clings tightly to the hope that her son will somehow miraculously return. Her eyes darted up and down the street. Where was there a blasted parking place downtown on a crowded Saturday morning? Suddenly her heart began to palpitate. Going the opposite direction, a group of servicemen were making their way toward the sidewalk in front of the Silco Theater. She saw a familiar thatch of dark hair. Screech! She hit the brakes to avoid hitting the car in front of her. Hey, lady, watch where you're going, the driver yelled. Lainey paid no attention. She had lost the group of soldiers. How could she possibly drive and look for them at the same time? In vain, she searched for his parking place, but there wasn't one there. She spotted the men who were pausing in front of a shop window further up the street. Lainey squinted. The height was right, the posture so familiar. She rolled her window down. JD, over here, JD. None of the servicemen looked up. However, a lot of other people turned around to see who she was calling to. He must not be able to hear me. As if on a mission, she parked her car in front of a bright red fire hydrant, leaving the keys in the ignition and her bag on the seat. She scraped her ankle as she mounted the high concrete curb, jostling shoppers as she half ran down the sidewalk. JD, she called to the young men who were well in front of her. Pow! She slammed directly into an older man, scattering his packages everywhere. Sorry, sir, hold on, I'll help you in a minute. The man stared in bewilderment as Lainey continued her trek up Main Street. Just when she thought she'd run out of oxygen, she spied him up the block going into the drugstore. With one final push of energy, she propelled herself through the entrance and up towards the display he was examining. So tired she could barely breathe, she uttered, JD, where have you been? She couldn't stop herself from giving him a familiar tap on the shoulder. He spun around in surprise, facing Lainey full on. It was so. You want to find out about this? But anyway, I'll let you, read forward and you can find out how this family handled the crisis that we call war. Does anybody have any questions?
Okay, good presentation.
Oh,
Very good.
thank you very much. Well, I've got the books here if anybody would like to get one.
You already gave me one, so I think everybody's